The following program is a Town of Colony television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Hello out there, I'm Joe Doolittle, and this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit.
And Kate Dudding is here, and as I said, I'm Joe Doolittle, and we are storytellers. And we're going to spend the next hour or so telling stories, talking about where you can hear stories or tell stories. Just remember, storytelling is one of the oldest, or the oldest way we've carried our knowledge down through the ages. So it's an important element of our life, really.
Yes, indeed. And it's one of the first performing arts. Musicians have tried to convince me that theirs is the first performing art, and so that's why I'm saying one of the first. But in terms of knowledge, we got them cold.
I think we got them cold. I think we got them cold on the performing thing, because what were they singing or playing melodies of but
stories?
That's right.
Oh, they weren't just abstract, listening to the wind whoosh through the trees and the rocks and things.
They weren't. They picked it up verbally, I'm sure, before they put it to music. You
heard it here.
That's right. And I have to say that this has been a period of time where we've had a little bit of storytelling progress. We had a great celebration.
Yes.
With about 180 folks at the GE Theater. Mm-hmm. And I didn't tell, but I sat in the back and I just savored everything. I mean, some great stories. Christy Keegan and that lovely Karen Pillsworth as the MC.
Mm-hmm. The topic was challenges.
That's right, challenges.
So each story dealt with challenges people have faced.
That's right. It was and the theme kind of pulled both the performances to a pretty high level, and I think the audience rose to the challenges too.
Yes, there was a very sustained applause at the end. There wasn't the while they're putting on their coats.
Right.
Okay. It took us a while to get back up at the front of the room to take our bows. I was one of the speakers. And we took a bow, and the applause is not dying down.
That's right.
So we took another bow, and the applause is still not dying down. So I kind of went, well, thank all of you. Yeah. And then we started to scatter.
Yeah, that's genuine appreciation is what I would refer to that as. Mm-hmm. So that's usually the second weekend in November every year. So if you missed it this year, it'll probably be back at Proctor's next year too, because it's a celebration of storytelling by about 400 sites in storytelling guilds around the world.
Though our word plays are quite similar, the refreshments aren't as lavish.
That's true.
And we hold them in a smaller room. But each word play has a topic, like challenges, but let's see, the one coming up is the others, I think, or the unknown. And then all the stories fit in one way or another.
Yep.
Personal, historical, folk tales.
You try to have a story fit with its setting, and that's not always a big problem, but sometimes it can be a challenge. Excuse me.
Yes, though sometimes you can be very clever about that.
And you were the lead producer of Celebration. I know you got my name on the program, but you really did a lot more of the hands-on work of organizing it, and it was just seamless. It happens in the GE Theater, which is a great place to tell and listen. And newbies get $2 off, and we have members of the guild giving people $2 who are new. I think we
call them our $2 ladies.
Our $2 ladies.
And we had about 37 new people,
Yep.
according to the $2 ladies. But also the people who did the refreshments, they've been doing it for several years. And they said, oh, yeah, we already had it. When I asked them, oh, yeah, we assumed and we're already working on it. And Karen Pillsworth, the MC, just said, will you pass this information on to the tellers? And, you know, everybody works hard, does their part, and it works. It works.
And so storytelling is, in addition to being educational and entertaining, it's also community building. When we come together as either listeners or tellers, community gets generated. You know, there are real connections, and it's not necessarily only the cookies or the punch. It's the feeling and it's the identification with that. I like to think that sometimes when I'm telling or when I'm listening, I get almost a parallel story that's going on up here while the teller's up there, because it generates something going on in my memory, in my time, in my heart. And that's one of the added treasures of listening to a story or telling a story. So other than Telebration, have you been doing anything interesting?
Well, something interesting showed up in my email this week. It was an email, and it started, I heard you tell Halloween stories at the Schenectady Public Library when I was a kid.
Oh.
You were the first storyteller I ever heard. And now I'm the coordinator for the Friends of Schenectady Public Library for their event called Harry Potter Day, which is held near Halloween. And according to the pictures that I found on the internet, there are lots of people dressed up in, you know, Hogwarts clothes, and the adults are dressed up like professors.
And brooms?
No,
No,
that's only if you're playing Quidditch.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yes. But they had someone who had an owl. Owls are used for their airmail.
Right.
Owls. There was a hawk. Hawks could be used too. There were snakes. They figure in the storyline, and in at least I think the first Harry Potter book. So a lot of activities. So the email went on, and we would you like to come and tell stories for either the younger group, 8 to 12, or the 13-year-olds? And so I said, yes.
Which group did you tell?
The younger ones, because I really don't have a lot of scary stories. I have the one about the lighthouse that's sort of haunted, but scary stories aren't my thing. But when I was trying to find what I wanted to concentrate on in storytelling, I dabbled in a lot of things, and some of those were interactive stories with kids, and some of those were slightly scary stories. I am the ghost with one black eye. That's running up the stairs from the cellar. Anyways.
Oh, wow. So that must have been fun. In addition to having the little kids, you had this other person that remembered you from when she was a kid.
Yeah.
That's a great story in and of itself.
Yes, it was like, I was the first storyteller. Ooh. In fact, at one of the storytelling conferences I went to, someone said, now every time you do a performance, you should do your best, because you never know. There may be somebody in the audience and it's the first time they've seen a storyteller, or it might be the last time.
Wow.
So
I actually had an adventure with young people too. I don't tell stories to young people on, really it's not one of my preferences. I tend to be a bigger person, storyteller. And I have a dear friend from high school who has 5-year-old triplet grandkids. And through another experience, I had met the parents. And Jim called me up and said, would you like to tell stories at their birthday party? And I go, he says, do you tell stories to kids? And I said, well, for these kids, I would do it, but I just want you to know, it might be a little awkward. He says, okay. So it's a Greek family, and it's a Greek party. There's like 55, 60 people there, and the kids are all downstairs. And I won't give you a blow-by-blow of all of it, but I did get through, like, my hat it has three corners in doing some songs and some skits, and
You have a puppet, don't you?
I had the fox, and I did all that, and I had my red noses, and that was the piece de resistance, was the red noses and stuff. And so the kids were great, actually, and I looked over at this one little girl, and I looked down at her, and I said, "So, Sophie," I said, "how was I? Were you bored?" She says, "Not very much." So I told Jim that I would not do it again. No, just...
Well, you need a repertoire.
Well, I might, but it was a rush. I was more nervous there than many other performances that I've done, just because.
It's a stretch.
It is a stretch. I'm going to introduce our guest for this show.
Oh, okay.
Our guest for today was detained in a traffic jam on the thruway. So instead of Lorraine Hart and Gilardi, who we're going to bring to the table some other time, I've always been curious about one of Kate's area of interest in storytelling. And it's really developing and listening and harvesting stories of Muslims. And in this day and age, it is a heartfelt task. It is a real calling. And so, Kate, we're going to use this opportunity to kind of hear from you about how this whole collection of work started and what's happened to it and where do you think it's going? Because I think it's quite remarkable and memorable, and I'm proud to know you as a storyteller because of the way you've taken the opportunity to build on what could be differences and make them points of common understanding.
Thank you, Joe.
Welcome.
It all just happened to happen.
That's the way it happened, I suppose. Yes.
Well, just in a similar way that I had no intention of being a storyteller. I had a master's degree in computer science and had been working as a computer programmer at G's Research Center for a long time. But then I fell in love with the art of storytelling, and I knew that I needed to pursue this. Mm-hmm. So something similar happened with the learning, telling stories about Muslims. I really had no contact with Muslims. 9/11 was, I knew they existed. I knew they prayed 5 times a day, Mecca, I probably couldn't, that's the extent I could have answered questions on Jeopardy about Muslims, Mohammed, I think I could have put him in there too, but 9/11 happened, but it was strange. I kept on expecting the next attack. There was this horrific attack, and the next one never happened in the United States. So that got me to thinking, well, this can't be a very big organized group if this was their one shot. And then, now, my dear friend Gert Johnson, who founded the Interfaith Story Circle of the Capital District, how she responded to 9/11 was she reached out to the Islamic school in Colony and offered to go and teach their students how to tell stories from their own faith traditions. And as a ending part of her work there, she had the students and some adults from the mosque across the street from the school be the focus of one of her Interfaith Story Circle meetings. And so that was the first time I had heard Muslim stories. But the funny thing was, every time I heard a folk tale, I went, I've heard a Jewish version of that. And then I thought, well, there are a lot of Muslims in the Middle East, and the way folk tales go, they cross cultures, they go with the traders, and so it made sense that they would have a similar, not all of them, but a good overlapping of stories. Now, they had tried to arrange the meeting so that they would avoid evening prayers. But it was April, and they forgot the time changed. So the evening prayers ended up right in the middle of the program. So everyone was invited to go upstairs to the sanctuary. And so I said, sure, I was invited, why not? I'm here. And besides, I thought to myself, it'll be quick. I had assumed, with no more a piece of data than they pray 5 times a day, that it had to be quick.
Right.
I was raised Catholic, and after you say your confession, the priest says, well, now say so many Hail Marys and so many Our Fathers. Something you can whip off in about 2 minutes. And so I had always just assumed that this 5 times a day, my goodness, 5 times a day, it must be quick. Well, it wasn't. I mean, it was, I didn't time it because I knew it was going to be quick, but it seemed like, probably 10 minutes. And it got me to thinking, they do this 5 times a day, and it's based on the sun rising and sun setting. So it's not like if you're in a monastery, I've read mystery novels about monasteries, where there are prayers at 5 a.m. and at 7 a.m. and it's not by the clock, it's by the sun. So you have to be conscious every day of, it changes a minute or two,
right,
each of those 5 times, and I suddenly had an epiphany at this mosque that if they prayed like this, 10 minutes, 5 times a day, their lives revolve around it, they couldn't be terrorists. Terrorists could not be devout Muslims. I mean, the thought that came to me is, oh, look at the time, I've got to pray, but then I'll finish this bomb.
Yeah.
If you're praying 5 times a day, how can you have so much hate in your heart? It just didn't make any sense to me. And this eventually became a story of mine, because I was telling this to somebody this weekend, and she said, well, did you find any corroboration on this gut, and again, this gut feeling? It sounds like I just make decisions out of the air. But I said, well, yes, that I found in Time magazine in July of 2016, ISIS had bombed Muhammad the Prophet's birthplace, which is one of the most sacred places for Muslims. And Time magazine said, it is no surprise that ISIS targets Saudi Arabia. Islamic radicals have long viewed that the Saudi royals are allies of the West. Okay. The bombing is a signal that ISIS holds nothing sacred. Now, if you hold nothing sacred, you're clearly not a devout Muslim.
Right.
And then, in September that same year, the Dalai Lama spoke to a meeting of the European Union Parliament, and he said, Buddhist terrorism, Muslim terrorism, that wording is wrong. Any person who wants to indulge in violence is no longer a genuine Buddhist or Muslim. And then he went on to say, all major world religious traditions carry the same message, the message of love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, contentment, self-discipline, all religious traditions. So these are the common grounds and the common practice, and at that level we can build genuine harmony among the religions. So I would say that that epiphany that I had was correct. That, and if you think about it, people have used, like the Crusades, I'm not so sure that that was religiously oriented. I think that's power and money and land. But they put the nice label on it to justify what they're doing. And I think that's happened throughout the centuries, that it's not the religious.
Right. And one of the things that's remarkable about your story is that you took a pretty big step. Not many people have been in a mosque. Mm-hmm. Not many Christians or Jews have a Muslim that they know outside of perhaps work or know well. And I think that your ability to kind of not be intimidated by going to the story circle in the mosque and beginning to experience that, in effect, creates the epiphany. You know, it creates the awareness. And then the stories, as you said, bingo, I've heard the story in a Yiddish version too. Mm-hmm. So there's got to be more common ground here than one would first think. Mm-hmm. And that's a hero's walk, Kate. It is.
Okay, I think of it as more of listening well.
Well, there you go.
Listening well, and then another time, 4 years later, another Interfaith Story Circle program under the Tent of Abraham. Mm-hmm. Audrey Seidman, one of the members, had read a book by that name, and it spoke on how Christians, Jews, and Muslims all have Abraham as one of their patriarchs.
Right.
That's what Under the Tent of Abraham is about. And the book says, so they all belong to the family of Abraham. But as is true of all families, each member tells their story differently. Because while Abraham is a patriarch, there are shadings of the stories that are details, sometimes important details, that are different, mm-hmm. and that people have been fighting about. But the author said, we're all under the tent of Abraham, and Abraham's tent was, his physical tent, mm-hmm. was open on all four sides, so that strangers, no matter where they could come from, could enter easily and be welcomed and fed and sheltered. So there was, Audrey said, let's have an Interfaith Story Circle meeting based on that. And they arranged for someone to talk about, there's a Christian holiday, I think it was St. Francis of Assisi, I'm not sure. And that year, Ramadan and the holy month of fasting and prayer for Muslims and the Jewish New Year and Day of Atonement were all within 3 weeks of each other. So there were people speaking from each of those traditions. And so I went to that. I go not regularly, but sometimes, I catch one or two a year. And it was started with a potluck supper. And that was vegetarian,
Good old Methodist way of doing business, I'll tell you.
It's a Christian tradition. And it was vegetarian because if you keep kosher, if you're Jewish, that the animals have to be slaughtered a certain way, and only certain animals can be eaten. And the Muslims have a similar, the proper way to kill animals, to raise them and to kill them. And so to avoid all those things, let's just do vegetables, and nobody has a problem with that. So I don't know about you, but whenever there's a buffet and people said, okay, we're all set, come on up, people don't. Well, I do. It's not that I'm starving, but it's like, okay, it's time. These people, the food is hot. My mother was one. She was the one that controlled when we had dinner. She didn't care if there was a football game, if someone was fixing a car. the food was hot, you came and sat at her table. So just to keep things going, so I get up. So I'm one of the first people in line, and behind me are like 4 or 5 Muslim women, whom I can recognize because they have head coverings on, and they're not wildly colorful. Some Hindu women might have a headscarf, but they're usually brilliantly colored, and these were more subdued. And I smiled at them, they smiled at me. And then I realized this is Ramadan. All day long, they had not had anything to drink, nor they had anything to eat. It was now after sundown. They had probably broken their fast. I knew this much now because there had been a presentation at work at lunchtime by a Muslim who worked where I did. Broken their fast, but I said, no, you haven't eaten all day, please go before me. And they said, oh no, that's all right, you go first. I said, oh no, really, I insist. Now, had I been fasting all day and somebody offered me, to get a little closer to food, I would have taken it, but not these ladies, not these ladies. And so and then there was, when the stories were being shared, I could see that a rabbi was telling the beginning of Abraham's story, and then he got to the point where Abraham and his wife Sarah couldn't have children, so Sarah said, why don't you sleep with my servant Hagar, and perhaps you can have a child with her. And one of those nice Muslim ladies said, could I tell this story from here? And the rabbi said, certainly. And so off she went, and she kept on pausing. Is this the way? Is this the way you tell it? And the rabbi said, yes, this is the way. So it was a lovely sharing, and the, being a part of a family. It was all there. So that was another part of my awakening. And then I guess the third part was the story I have about First Lieutenant Mohsen Naqvi, that I was reading in 2008. I was reading the Times-Union online, and they had a video of the funeral of First Lieutenant Mohsen Naqvi. He was being buried from a mosque in Colony, not the one I had been, but a different one, and buried on the Albany-Schenectady Road. And there was his father was there, and they were Muslims, and his father said, why are we Muslims blamed for what 23 people did? Why is that? My son was a patriotic American. He is lying under tons of dirt. He gave his life for this country. Everyone should think of him as a patriotic American. And I felt that was the truth. That was definitely the truth. And that fit in with my feeling of, there were the 9/11 people. They're just a small fraction. And then I found out more and more about Mohsen Naqvi, and he said to friends, the only way I can show how much I love this country is by joining the Army. So I researched his story online. He had been interviewed several times after he had joined the Army. And then people had been interviewed after his death. But I didn't have a place to tell the story until I was asked to, in 2014, I was asked to tell Muslim stories for a class who was reading a novel set in Afghanistan. And at first I thought, well, I don't know any Muslim stories. And they went, oh, well, I know those folk tales. They have a a wise fool character, Nazuddin the Hoja. And, oh, I know those. And, oh, right, there's that folktale, What Melody is the Sweetest, I know that. And then my epiphany at the mosque, I could tell that. And the story about Mohsen. I hadn't told it much because it meant a lot to me, and I didn't want to tell it and have somebody say, well, he was Muslim, how can you think anything good about them?
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that, but I'm a member of the Academy for Lifelong Learning, and so I thought I did. I thought I would take the chance. And after I told the stories, ending with that one, with his death, and a lot of people came up and said, you should tell those stories. We need to hear those stories. And that's when I decided, okay, I've been given a task, I should do it.
I'm fascinated and intrigued by your story of your stories, but I'm almost thinking that we ought to hear a story.
Well, why don't we do the coming attractions?
Well,
so we're halfway through, and
can I talk to my partner? Because usually a guest doesn't take over like this. Oh, I'm sorry. You are my partner. All right. Why don't we do the coming attractions, Kate?
Okay. Yes. So, January 2nd.
January 6th.
That's the first Tuesday of the month, and Joe has a series at Arthur's in the Stockade section of Schenectady. First Tuesday's Tales and Stuff, and the featured teller is Claire Beetlestone. Stories Out of the Winter Wind.
Out of the Winter Wind. She's going to tell stories of winter, and it's January. Arthur's is a cozy spot to listen. They've got good chow there, and we encourage anybody who wants to come and play a song, play an instrument. There's a piano that's in tune there, or tell a story. And it's a fun evening. We like to have a lot of people show up because it makes it more fun. So please come.
And then the next day is the start of the winter storytelling series of the Academy of Lifelong Learning up in Saratoga Springs. I think this is excuse me, the 7th season, where every Wednesday, starting the first Wednesday in January, for 6 weeks, there will be storytelling. Well, 7 weeks, excuse me. At noon at 2 Union Avenue, which is one of those Empire State College buildings that's right at the beginning of Union next to the Congress Park.
Next to Congress Park.
And January 3rd, there'll be Carol and Kent Gregson. I'll be on January 10th with stories of serving our country, and one of those stories is about First Lieutenant Mohsen Naqvi. Margaret French, Betty Cassidy, Joe Peck, Christy Keegan, Siri Allison, all people who've been on this show.
Right.
Yes. So.
And there's no charge for this.
This is absolutely free. There's a snow date because, we do get snow.
That's right.
That if Saratoga Springs schools are closed, this does not happen. So we invite any of you who are free on Wednesdays at noon to come along and get some stories in the middle of the week. So I'll be telling, as I said, on January 10th, a story of my father's war. He was a day behind Patton, is all he told me, but I was able to find out more. He was in an anti-aircraft artillery battalion. A story about Irving Berlin and what he did during World War II. A story about a wonderful nurse, Lib Liberty, who retired as a lieutenant colonel, a nurse. She served in World War II, Korea, and did at least 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, if not 3. And Lieutenant Mohsen Naqvi and a couple of others.
Wow, good for you. That's going to be, and that's the 3rd week of?
That's the second. January 10th, the
January
2nd
10th.
Wednesday. And then that night, just stay and then and go to the casino, look at the music. There's the open mic at Cafe Cafe Lena. It
Cafe Lena.
alternates between Cafe Lena and another site. But on Wednesday, January 10th at 7 o'clock at Cafe Lena, there will be an open storytelling mic. I do not know who the featured teller is, but they only get like 20 minutes, so there are about 8 slots for people to tell. Come at 6:45 to sign up.
And that's another remarkable space and venue since it was recently renovated.
Oh, it's gorgeous, and
and
comfortable, and you can get lots of different kinds of food.
And it still has that old feel of the 60s.
Yes.
So it's a bit of good memory as well as current entertainment.
Right. And it's a modest fee of $5. So then we have our Story Circle meeting on Tuesday, January 16th, right here in Colony Town Library. Colony Town Library, thank you for all you do for us. And 6 to 8, sharing stories under development. You can get as much or as little feedback as you like, or you can just come and listen. No reading, please, of your stories. Then the Interfaith Story Circle that we've been talking about. This is their 25th anniversary year. And each of their meetings this year will be about a different facet of the power of story. On Thursday, January 18th at 7 p.m. at the Hubbard Interfaith Sanctuary in Albany, the power of story for stepping into meditation. And the featured teller will be Janaki Ramkumar. So they're always interesting meetings. And then, January, we are just jam-packed full of things.
Jam-packed full of, it'll probably have 3 or 4 blizzards that month. You know?
No.
Sorry.
I don't know how to do that in Muslim.
It's okay.
That was Christian, Jewish.
Yeah.
And on Sunday, January 21st, we'll have another word play at Proctor's, where solo performers tell stories celebrating the human spirit. The topic is the unknown. And we have 6 women.
Six women.
Telling stories. Christy Keegan, Claire, and 2 Claires, Claire Beetlestone and Claire Nolan, myself, Marnie Gillard, and Siri Allison. And that's on the 2nd floor of Proctor's, the Fenimore Art Gallery. Please come.
Great place to listen to stories.
And then you will tell us about what's happening on Sunday the 28th. Would you please?
Well, I tell with 2 other friends, both of whom are ordained clergy, but we call ourselves 3 Spirits, Kent Bushman, Harlan Ratmeyer, and I. And we've been telling together for several years, and each January we try to do a benefit performance themed to one of the respective ministries of our congregations. And this one is on caring for creation. It's stories of wonder. And it builds on some things that Ken Bushman has hosted up at Camp Fowler that deal with the idea of stewardship and advocacy for the environment. And we're going to have a good time. And it's a Story Sunday without dinner. It's a Story Sunday with just Smith's Pies a la mode, which will be intermission. And we've woven that theme around our stories. Harlan Ratmeyer has a wonderful garden that is on his church property down in Bethlehem. And he has the cycle of the garden with pictures. And he's going to talk about that in the concept of other cycles. That's the closer. And I've enlisted my wife, Gay Doolittle, to tell a story, a little bit of a case study of our church and its composting experience. And she's all excited about this, and it's a good reference of how you begin to think green in a practical way. And so that's what it's like. It'll be fun. It'll be a family-oriented program. There's no set fee. There will be a free offering to support the Caring for Creation initiative up at Camp Fowler.
Okay.
And
You might have a suggested rate.
Well, we might, but I think we've done okay in the past with this
Okay.
approach, and we're really interested in attracting organizations who want to know about options they can do to build a greener footprint in terms of ways they can reduce their carbon footprint, the composting thing, community or environmental sensitive investments with endowments and things they can do. So we'll be talking more about this with some faith communities to maybe show up and share pie and share stories.
And there are a bunch of groups, I imagine, that you need to get in contact with to let them know.
Well, there's the
Environmental Clearinghouse.
and Adirondack Wild, the Adirondack Council, EOS, which is another one of those folks, the United Council of Churches, the Schenectady Intercity Ministry are all on our target list.
And what about Cornell Cooperative?
Roots and Wisdom is that's part of Cornell Cooperative Extension. Thank you for that, and put them on the list, Jen.
And right, okay. So that should be a wonderfully green.
Wonderfully green, and if you're thinking about coming, on the flyer is an email and a phone number. Please call in an RSVP, because it's a moving part if you don't have an idea of the general attendance.
Yeah, we want the pieces of the pie not to be teensy
That's right.
weensy, but
Well, we've
are
invited
not biggy wiggy.
we have invited that little kid with his loaves of fishes and told him to bring pies this time, but that always doesn't work.
Yeah. Can't count on that. And on a Sunday night, it's hard to send out for extra. Okay. So we have 16, 17 minutes left. I have a story. So after I had decided that I needed my next CD would be about Muslims and their stories, I started searching the internet for news stories. And this is a piece of one of I have a CD. I did finish that, and now you're getting a close-up of it, learning about Muslims. And there's a picture right in the middle of Lieutenant Mohsen Naqvi. And the woman I'm going to speak about is in the bottom right-hand corner. So I have a story on my CD called True Believers, and it's a story of 3 Muslims. But this I pared down to just talking about one when I was on Ann Perillo's Schenectady Today show. And you only have a 7-minute segment, so a 10-minute story doesn't really fit. So I never realized that many religions have a golden rule, but they do. Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish and Christian, I knew that, but many religions do. And the Muslim version is, none of you truly believes until you wish for your brother what you wish for yourself. So very much the same thing, but said a little differently. And one of the articles I found in the news articles on the internet that I found was about a 23-year-old Muslim theology student from Brooklyn. In July of 2015, there were some horrific things happening in the South. There was the murder of 9 people in the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. And following that, as if that wasn't bad enough, several black Christian churches were burned. And when a church is burned, oh my goodness, it's, the community, it's such a devastating to the community, and they have nowhere to meet now that their meeting place is gone, just when they need it the most, almost. And of course, it takes a lot of fundraising to raise enough money to rebuild something like a church. Well, this 23-year-old Muslim theology student, Fatima Knight, decided to help. She created a fundraiser online. She wrote, "All houses of worship are sacred. These must be rebuilt, and you can help." She set a goal of $10,000, and she was going to donate the money to help these black Christian churches that had been burned. But she reached the goal in 12 hours. So she had to reset her goal. This is one of those fundraising groups where you had to meet your goal to get anything. So she wanted to increase it to raise more money, but she didn't want to set a goal so high and then there would be nothing. But she thought and finally decided if she could raise $10,000 in 12 hours, maybe $50,000 in the whole month, maybe that would be a modest goal. And indeed, that was met within 2 weeks. So again, she had to reevaluate what her goal was going to be. And she decided to double it to $100,000. And indeed, that goal was met by over 2,000 people donating. Now, this happened to have been during the month of Ramadan, which is a traditional time for Muslims to donate to charity. Charity is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And she also wrote, "I started this fundraising to give hope in a time of fear and to stand up for those who have suffered injustice." Oh, those words, when I read that, they just kept on circling around in my head. To give hope in a time of fear and to stand up for those who have suffered injustice. That is such a wonderful way of putting it. And it's true for many people. If you've responded to any disaster, like any of the mass killings or the weather disasters, you have been giving hope in the time of fear and standing up for those who have suffered injustice. And the more I thought about her words, the more I realized that those are other ways of saying the Muslim golden rule. None of you truly believes until you wish for your brother, no matter what their religion, what you wish for yourself. However, Fatima did more than that. She acted. So that's my story of one true believer, one Muslim who stood up for her Christian brothers and sisters.
This is the affirmation that we give at the Interfaith Storytelling program, by the way. We don't clap. We rub our hands together. So I'm doing that in honor of the occasion. Great story. Great story. Yeah. And the final amount she raised was?
$100,000.
$100,000.
Yes.
Wow. And she was a
23-year-old theology student.
Yeah. Wow.
From Brooklyn.
From Brooklyn.
Yeah, native-born American. And you can find her on YouTube. Yeah, it was in a speech for a different organization, for some organization, that she said, give hope in a time of fear. I love that.
Hope in the time of fear.
Yes.
Stories of hope in a time of fear would be a good name for a CD. It's a preachable sermon topic, too. Start of a really good poem. Stories in a time of fear.
Yeah.
Well, you've got literally years of research, and you've got a CD. Are you still kind of harvesting stories or harvesting ideas for stories?
If I run across them, I will. That I have one that Gert Johnson pointed out to me about a student, an Arabic student who came to the United States to study, and he was beaten up in Oregon, Portland or Salem, anyways, a city in Oregon, and so he moved to another one, and then on the street, a fellow said, I have a, here, do you need it, do you want to buy a laptop? I've got one cheap, $200. And he needed one, so he bought it. But when he powered it up, he realized this was somebody's laptop. This was a stolen laptop.
Right.
And he called his cousin who had been in the country longer, and he agreed. Yeah, this was personal pictures, and this was yeah. If the guy who sold it to him had owned it, he would have cleared off his own stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So he figured out how to contact the owner. Called him up. The owner said, "You're just scamming me." Clunk. If it's true, well, just drop it off at a police station. Click. And so the Arab student did that, and the police, were going, "What? Huh?" And he said, and so they called the guy, and then he believed that his car had been broken into and his laptop had been stolen, and he wanted to repay the Arab student the $200, and he said, no. I should not have bought it, and it was my duty as a Muslim to return it. But no, you do not owe me the $200.
Oh.
That's quite a sense of honor.
Right.
Yes. So actually, knowing his name would be good, but that's one I've saved away. But what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to tell these stories, and I haven't figured out. I've been offering to do this, learning about Muslims, and people haven't been taking me up on it. So I've taken a different route. I have a program, The Kindness of Strangers, and in that program I stick one or two stories from my CD. And I'm thinking of having another program about epiphanies, where I can stick others of these stories. And I went, do I have any other epiphany stories? And I came up with like 20. Some of my personal ones, like my mother's hands.
Right.
And I am my father's daughter, and some other people, historical people, when they had epiphanies. So I'm working on the title now. Oh, now I understand. The Kindness of Strangers is such a wonderful title.
Right.
I'm trying to come up with something. Epiphany is a little religious-y and somewhat esoteric, and oh, now I've got it. Something like that. Stories of realizations or realizations, maybe revelations. I'm working on it to come up with a nifty title, but I've got a program all lined up and with backup. So the places where I've been telling The Kindness of Strangers, I'm getting ready to go back and say, oh, I've got a new program. And again, sticking in the Muslim stories where.
Wow. Wow. When I asked you to tell us a little bit more about your harvesting and telling stories of Muslims, I had no idea how thorough you were in your approach. It's very impressive in terms of the way you've set the scope of the work and put some discernment to the right stories at the right time. It's just been great, Kate. Really, really good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I recommend the slipping things in, because I'm not preaching. I just want people to open their hearts and minds.
And one of the things that you might be curious about out there is a little bit about when the Interfaith Story Circle meets, because they meet 12 times a year, 10 times a year.
They don't meet in July and August. I think they do meet in June. And their website is withourvoice.org/IFSC.
And that's on one of the slides. But I would encourage you to, the nice thing about the gatherings is that they are rotated in various faith communities around the region. So it's likely that you could find one nearby where you live that would be more convenient than maybe driving across town. And it might be a Buddhist presentation, it might be a Muslim presentation, whatever. But that gathering of good hearts comes together, and that's the first blessing. The stories are the second, I suppose, and the third is the memory and the stimulus about what happens after you've been at the program in terms of what you might find yourself involved with. You might even go out and collect stories and start to tell them.
Or repeat the ones you've heard there.
Right. And so that's a takeaway and a sincere invitation from this performance, our effort at Story Circle, and our brothers and sisters at the Interfaith Story Circle.
And at the top right-hand corner, I believe, of their website is a button called Stay in Touch, and you can sign up for their email. Email blasts.
Blasts, right.
Which will tell you when the next meeting is. And then the website, when the meeting information is available, it comes up on the website. I'm their volunteer webmaster. So.
Among other things.
So we have just a minute left, Joe.
Just a minute left. Well, we've actually discovered how to not live with a story in fear. Is that the line? I didn't say it right.
To give hope in a time of fear. Use stories to give hope in a time of fear.
That's what we would like to think that we've done for you today with sharing some of the work and stories of Kate Dudding. Be encouraged to go to the Interfaith Story Circle website, check it out, attend a meeting, and see what happens. It could be a good adventure.
And by the way, I don't really consider myself a person of faith, but I have values. It used to be called Faith and Values, and I'm not a part of any organized or disorganized religion, but I do feel things. I do have a sense of honor, and I do try to do the right thing.
And I think we try to have storytelling be a welcoming situation and environment. One that is entertaining, that may teach us something, and one that lets us carry something home. We're pleased that you shared some of your home with us today, or this evening. And Kate, thank you very much for a very informative bit of storytelling background.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you. We hope you come back again.
Much good cheer.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle. I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round.